Welcome everyone, Questini here with a discussion about one of the most absurd campaigns in the game, and probably one of the most broken campaigns. Broken as in it actually breaks the way the game works, or the way the game is meant to work. And this is of course Tehenhauin, the Cult of Sotek, the little Pepe, as I would call him, and really he earns the title of Pepe far more so than Mazdamundi, who is a pathetic legendary lord in comparison. Tehenhauin is a pretty solid legendary lord enough. He does have pretty good faction effects, and he has a pretty good campaign situation. But I didn't quite realize how utterly broken he was. I was wrong. Simple as that. I've generally rated him in tier list lower than I probably should have. Now, there was a reason behind that. That while Tehenhauin has certain faction effects that are powerful, I always felt that his campaign pace would be slower and would limit his potential. In that, I was wrong. The reason I was wrong, I didn't quite realize how freaking crazy this guy could get via Confederations. Because I figured out what you kind of need to do with Confederations to a level. That's the reason behind the recent videos I did on this channel on the subject of how to confederate lords. I spent a lot of hours figuring out how to confederate Malekith as Helebron, for instance, like 10 plus hours, 12 plus hours, getting it down to the exact science there. And once you do that, this is why playing a game for many hours is consistently a learning experience, assuming there is stuff to be learned. And Warhammer 3 is certainly that game. There's a lot of legendary lords, there's a lot of mechanics, there's a lot of things to it. And sometimes you miss things, because obviously with so many legendary lords, how much time can you devote to any particular campaign? What I generally do when I test a campaign is I play it in the early game, and I reach a point where I figure, okay, I've won, there's no way I'm going to lose, and that's it. That's how I generally rate campaigns. That's behind my tier ranking. And also it comes down to the amount of effort that is required in a campaign, how good the flow of campaign is, like, is it annoying, are you wasting a lot of time? Now, Tehenhauin certainly wastes a lot of time, but that is not really a problem in his campaign. The reason I say that is turn 46. This is ridiculous, I'm sorry. Like, when I look at this map, I don't believe it. Like, I've captured significant swaths of the campaign map before, in many campaigns, sometimes even faster than this. Lustria, however, is a special case. The reason Lustria is a special case, like, say, the Southlands, is down to the fact that it is slow to traverse. Unless you're playing Skrolk, who is a Skaven Lord, can field a lot of armies very quickly, can recruit units very quickly, and can use the Underway to traverse the territory very quickly, you are not really going to be able to capture this amount of territory in a Lustrian campaign. Unless you're playing Tehenhauin. Like, Oxyatl might do it if you devoted all of your resources and you got a bunch of missions in Oxyatl's campaign, he might do it, but it's not necessarily worth it. Tehenhauin does it, and he does it with ease, through Confederation. So, let me explain how this works, and how this level of bullshit is possible. So, we look at Tehenhauin's campaign. We look at his campaign effects. He gets sacrificial offerings, he gets a right cost of minus 75% for the Right of Sotek, and he gets an 200% upkeep for Saurus Inventory and Temple Guard until he unlocks stage 1, until he completes stage 1 of the Prophecy of Sotek. This is the Prophecy of Sotek. Now, this is not really hard to do in any way, shape, or form in a campaign. It's pretty easy, because you'll obviously start with the province, and if you play your cards right, you can confederate the Southern Sentinels very quickly in a campaign. Pretty simple. You start right next to Kayax, you take the settlement turn 1, then you march directly on Skrolk, who's just going to be chilling over here in the Sentinels of Time. You defeat Skrolk because you hard counter his army. Like, his early army has no chance against you. And then you stop. You sell the Sentinels of Time to the Southern Sentinels, you go back out here, you go into the Copper Desert. And eventually, the Southern Sentinels will be willing to confederate with you. And that's how you do the Prophecy of Sotek. And you also need to do a bunch of sacrifices. Once you do so, that's when things go fucking crazy. And that's where the game will completely break. in many ways, for a lot of factions, for all the Lizardmen factions, for all the Skaven factions, because Tehenhauin's whole shtick in a campaign is that he really is on a crusade against the Skaven. That's why he did in the lore, though he focused on Lestria. So what will happen in this campaign is, very early on, with the sacrifices of gaining control of provinces, every Lizardmen faction will declare war on every Skaven faction. It will be a permanent war. Now, I think this is one of the things that shouldn't happen quite so easily, but you end up with diplomacy with the Skaven locked, and crucially, early on, you get a major, significant benefit to diplomacy with the other Lizardmen, who also, since they're all at war with the Skaven factions, will like you as you're fighting these Skaven. So you confederate the Southern Sentinels, you use their army because they will have one, or you'll build one very quickly, that's not a problem. You'll build an army over here, and you'll finish off Skrulk. Or you won't finish off Skrulk, Gorak will finish off Skrulk. You're just as the leech to help him out. And you confederate them, and then you confederate the Sacred Pools. This is within, 10 turns, 20 turns or so of a campaign. Well, not 10 turns, but very, very quickly, right, of a campaign. Like, you go from one confederation to another, basically. 15 turns or so. So you confederate those factions very quickly. So you'll suddenly end up, and you also take the Copper Desert, you go beat up Rakarth. That's what you do with Tehenhauin's army. Your secondary and tertiary armies will just be over here helping Gorak. Because Gorak will be fighting Skrulk, and since you've already defeated Skrulk, you'll destroy his army. Gorak will have a very easy time, and he'll be in a permanent war with him. So you'll gain a permanent military alliance with Gorak, who will beat up every faction over here in central Lestria. You go on the western side of Lestria, beat up Rakarth. He has no chance against you. Now, the reason he has no chance against you comes down to the fact that you start with Bastiladons, you start with Croxigars, you start with Salamander hunting packs, you start with Saris Scar veteran, you can get the Skink Chief fairly early on, and everything else like the Chameleon Skinks that are part of this army, I recruited. Also the Blessed units, I'll talk about those in just a second. But you've got one army marching here, then you're just screwing around over here in the eastern side while Gorak basically does all the heavy lifting, but you're helping him with that. And how to put it, the Sacred Pools, the faction that controls the Sacred Pools is utter bullshit. The reason bullshit is they start with Temple Guard, Blessed Temple Guard. Like, you see this army over here, outside of like 2 Blessed Saurus warriors and skinks and all that, but most, outside of these units and regiments of renown, everything else, the Ancient Stegodon, the Blessed Croxigars, the Blessed Pterodons, all that, you getting those for a confederation. Your diplomatic power, because of the permanent war with Skaven and you get an early diplomatic benefit with Lizardmen, is so strong that you will roll on the confederations with the 2 minor factions of Lizardmen that are here that actually survive for a bit. So the Southern Sentinels and the Sacred Pools. You sell the Pools, by the way, to Gorak. You get a lot of money for that. And you basically are going to be in a permanent red zone with your economy, but it doesn't matter. Because what you're going to be doing in this campaign, you're going to be rolling around with this army, obliterating everything in your pack. So when I say everything, I mean this army destroyed Alberich, the Huntsmarshal, and Yanbo. I mean, to be fair, by the time we actually fought Yanbo fully, it's like Tehenhauin had also reached them. So you end up in this situation where you're fighting major factions with secondary armies and winning just because they're so powerful. Like, this army alone would be strong enough to take on, let's say, the Huntsmarshal on its own. Yanbo, it would not necessarily be the easiest fight, but Blessed Croxigars are pretty freaking powerful. A lot of armor piercing, a lot of damage, a lot of armor. Lots of leadership. But it's not just the power of the individual armies that comes into play, or the armies you get for confederations. No, it's not just that. Though, should be pointed out, it's turn 46, and I've got 6 armies over here. I certainly have the capacity to recruit, let's say, 2 more full armies like this. 2 more armies like this. These kind of armies are ridiculous. This is an army I recruited just from the Southern Sentinels to basically beat up Luthor Harkon and take some territory. Some of it I sold to Gorak, other territory I kept. This army steamrolled everything. But how do you do so? Like, what's the key here? Is it Saurus just being so powerful? Well, Saurus are going to hard counter the Skaven, and they're going to hard counter the Vampire Coast army. But that's not really the key here. the key is the sacrifices themselves. So beyond the diplomacy benefit, you get these sacrifices. And you'll get sacrificial offerings and a lot of resources, by the way. You'll get a bunch of rewards. So those rewards, you're going to fill up your economy with them. And what you end up doing is you sacrifice constantly. So you start with tier 1 sacrifices over here, and they're absurd enough. So you can get chameleon skinks for 250. You can get 15% casualty replenishment for 150 that stays on for 10 turns. So you've got a permanent casualty replenishment benefit of 15% with an army that's pretty good in Autoresolve. So Saurus armies are pretty good in Autoresolve. And once you complete stage 1, you start spamming Saurus and chameleon skinks. You get jungle swarm. You get leadership for skinks and chameleon skinks, so our armies are practically unbreakable, especially against Skaven with Tehenhauin. And you get 10 armor to all your armies. Understand, Lizardmen are pretty strong in individual battles. A full Saurus stack of Lizardmen is fairly strong. You give that Saurus stack, you give skinks 10 armor. They demolish everything that stands in their path. You give them a leadership benefit. You give them casualty replenishment so they recover very quickly. And you're going from battle to battle to battle to battle without stopping. Generally, the problem in a Lizardman campaign is the following. You have replenishment. You have heroes, but they're locked behind high-tier settlements, which take a significant amount of time to build up as the Lizardman. So it requires tier 3 to get an extra skink chief, and you require a spawn pool. Your economy is not capable of supporting your armies. Well, it doesn't matter what your economy is capable of supporting when you're going from battle to battle to battle. And you don't even sack settlements. You just loot and occupy them. And you fight legendary lords and you fight armies and you get truckloads of money through that process. You don't need heroes. So Tehenhauin's early ability of replenishment armor, they more than make up for the lack of heroes. So while you may struggle to get Saurus Scar veterans and all that in a campaign, it doesn't quite matter. And eventually in the long term, you'll get those as well. But that's just the early part. Then we start talking about bullshit. At the second tier of sacrifices, you start getting Blessed Cult 1 Spear Riders, and eventually you will be able to get Blessed Saurus Spears, random followers, growth. Like one of the problems in Lizardman campaigns is growth. Another problem in control. You get permanent 5 control, 15 growth. So understand the actual faction effects that we're talking here with Tehenhauin. 15% casualty replenishment, 10 armor, 15 growth, 5 control, -8 corruption. And that's just like the early stuff. You get a ion cannon, let's put it like that. So understand that when I say that the secondary army is taking on bow, I mean like this army, if I played it carefully, chose my battles, all that, I would obliterate Yanbo and Marcus Wolfhard and Albrecht, no problem. Once you start adding in those effects, like the early effects, the armor, the leadership, the casualty replenishment, the recruit rank, all that, it gets ridiculous. And because you're in that permanent war between Skaven, you get so much in terms of diplomatic benefits that you'll kind of have to stop yourself from confederating Gorok early on, because you actually benefit from having Gorok in your campaign. Now over here I disbanded his armies. I just recently confederated him. But I disbanded his armies because I want to rebuild them from scratch. You get the global recruitment duration benefit in your campaign. This campaign is absurd. There's no way I can describe it in any other significant fashion. You get more global recruitment slots. You get a lot of ridiculous benefits early on in this campaign, and you just keep rolling and keep rolling and keep rolling and keep rolling and recruit a lot of units, recruit a lot of armies very quickly, very decisively. And this is without considering things like, the right to ferocity, for instance, in a campaign, right? With the recruit rank that they give you, or the various commandments that you have. That's what's ridiculous. And that's what allows you to do this. This is absurd. This is flat out absurd. I could pull it off as Skrulk, but it would certainly be a very, very difficult thing to do so. And certainly Skrulk has a much harder early game. But Skrulk could do it naturally. Tehenhauin abuses the crap out of diplomacy, abuses the crap out of faction effects, their sacrifices. And I'm pretty sure Creative Assembly did not design this faction to work this way, because in Warhammer 2, if you remember, settlements were not so close to each other, right? So you weren't supposed to get so many sacrificial offerings as you are here. But because you are getting so many sacrificial offerings, you can get these effects permanently in a campaign. That's where the imbalance comes in. Okay, so I've said all that. Why does this campaign break the game? Well, the fact you have a permanent war between all the Lizardmen faction and all the Skaven factions creates the kind of situation in a campaign where these factions, like Axolotl, for instance, over here, has been chilling with free stacks of troops doing nothing because he's at war with all those Skaven factions. Like only Mors and Scryer and Rictus are still alive of the major ones. You will get, by the way, Ikeclaw to invade Leicester. It doesn't matter. I'll talk about how easy it is to hold all of this territory, because you might think, oh, it's a vast array of territory. How could you defend all this coastline? I'll explain why, because you have all the tools needed to do so. But he's been sitting here over here in his initial province doing absolutely nothing, whereas in a normal campaign, he would be fighting over here. I basically had to build an entire stack just to invade over here. And by the way, that incredible casualty replenishment and armor makes it so I'll probably steamroll over here in this map against Kairos, who does have a good amount of the territory. Now, it won't break the campaign for every single one of them, but it will break the campaign for a lot of them, for enough of them that it causes issues, like Ikeclaw preparing to invade the Galleon's graveyard type issues. Okay. That kind of stuff. Those are some of the problems that come up here. And it breaks the game because the AI cannot handle a global war like this. It just can't. We see it with Angering Crises, the kind of decisions they make. But let's talk about the nonsense that then happens in a campaign like this. So, why is it so easy to defend your territory? Well, one of the things you can do, and one of the things, like, you can recruit, let's say you see an army advancing on the coast. You'll always see an army via the coast because of the line of sight. You can then recruit a lord and then get regiments renowned. You have a large pool of regiments renowned that you can use. Okay, that's available to other factions. But all these sacrifices, well, how to put it? You start with the ability of getting Blessed Chameleon's Kings. And here's the thing about Blessed units. They can be recruited anywhere for no money. I am not joking. This is utterly broken. Axolotl breaks this as well because he gets a lot of blessed units through his rewards. You get for sacrifices. So you end up in any situation, you can recruit either a combination of regiments, renowned, blessed units to defend any territory. And because you get so many benefits in armor, replenishment, leadership, it takes more than any army in the game, except maybe, like Legendary Lord, an Ikeclaw army with a proper roster to be able to take any of your territories. So you're able to expand your armies, your main armies are able to keep going, never stop going, whereas you never have to worry about, as you do in the vast majority of campaigns, you can't just expand without any consequence whatsoever in every campaign. You have to consider, okay, are my neighbors going to declare war on me? Is X faction going to show up on my port and do so? Can I defend against that? That's something you have to worry about in a lot of campaigns. The fact that you don't, because of sacrificial offerings and regiments renowned, means this campaign is utterly broken. Like, you could just have a roster of lords. I don't necessarily did so because I only suffered like a couple of invasions from Ikeclaw, and it was minor stuff anyway. And they also came face to face with some of my main armies. But you can build up armies to defend your territory. And that makes this incredibly powerful because you can spawn a stack of powerful troops of better than normal troops to defend your territory. And since settlements have a Autoresolve benefit, guess what you can do against? Many factions. That might think, oh, we're just going to send, let's say, half a stack to raid their territory. You just spawn half a stack yourself, you obliterate their ass, and then go on the offensive against them. And you can do this again and again and again and again. And it breaks the AI for Skaven, it breaks the AI for Lizardmen. I mean, Gorok, like, some factions will do just fine because they'll have wars declared on them. So Tic-Tac-Toe, for instance, over here, he did capture the normal territory he would do. Krokar, he's captured the normal territory he would in his campaign, but he's kind of stopped. You can see that these factions have taken them some territory, but they've also managed to stop as well. It is insane what you can do, and while I would not recommend this campaign because it's still Lustria, and Lustria it's not really a fun, great experience. And Lizardmen are still not going to be great. But if you want to play a Lizardman campaign that's vanilla, not Oxyatl, who breaks the rules of the Lizardmen completely, because yeah, he still has to build settlements, but he also gets a lot of missions, a lot of rewards, and a lot of money. He doesn't need an economy, for instance. Oh, he just shows up at Archaon's doorstep, takes his capital, sells it to Boris Ursus, or just holds it because he has every climate in the game suitable. Yeah, that's what Oxyatl does. It's insanely broken. But if you want to play a Lizardman campaign that's closer to vanilla, so to speak, the vanilla rules, Tehenhauin would probably be the better choice available. And that would be about it. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. Thank you all for watching. Special thanks to Protossx, Kebie, Fingo, JK, Vacre, Alain, Alex, and Daniel, and to all of you who make it possible. Check out my Patreon if you're interested in supporting the channel.